Here's a sneak peek from today's episode.
But until that happens, the measurement isn't really what's broken, it's what you're measuring.
Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Tom. Tom, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Ben.
Yeah, Tom, I'm excited. This is going to be a conversation around a subject that I honestly don't know a ton about. This is going to be something where I think a lot of people can learn from your experience, regardless of what industry they're in or what they're focusing on, but really exposure to a whole new category. But before we dive into that, Tom, let's get to know you. First of all, we always ask our guests, what do you love about content and marketing? And then kind of catch us up on your career and your background.
Sure. So in terms of content and marketing, I feel like it's sort of hand in hand with my sort of fascination with film, TV, the sort of growing up as somebody who watched a lot of TV. And I think, is sort of throughout his career, I've basically been somebody who has always been interested in sort of how is it made? How does it impact? How does it persuade? And so I think that's sort of how I got excited by it, but I didn't really get into it until, thrust in the workforce. For me, that happened when I was living in China. So I studied in Beijing and then in Nanjing, and then I started to work in Shanghai, and I worked for Unilever. And I worked specifically in trade marketing for Unilever. And I didn't really know what that was when I first started, but it was basically how retailers and brands sort of negotiate, what's going to show up in the store. And, specifically in China, it was kind of fun. I was working with Unilever's, at the time, new acquisition, Best Foods. And that was sort of a bunch of very familiar types of products like soy sauce and tea, Lipton and Knorr, or the local brand Lao Cai. And then really not familiar ones at the time, peanut butter with Skippy and mayonnaise with Hellmann's. And so it was a challenge to try to sort of put all those products into store. But what it taught me was sort of the fights that happen between the retailer and the brand in terms of who's going to give up more of their profits to be on the shelf and what makes sense in terms of managing the data that is shared between the two of them. If you fast forward to sort of my career now, I got very excited about mobile technology. I started to work for a company who was building out mobile websites, turned into an ad platform. But then about 10 years into it, retail and brands sort of became the focus again, because we were working with Home Depot and they were looking to get us to target people in parking lots of Lowe's or Target or other stores that were competitors of theirs. And we hit on something that was the sort of really early beginnings of retail media. And coupons.com acquired the company. They turned that company into Quotient. And the mission for me and my team was to build retail media networks for, at the time, Albertson Safeway, Ahold Delhaize, Dollar General. And I think what was happening was, that initial great use case that we came up with, which was, using location targeting to find customers in what you would call a conquesting in somebody's parking lot. That was sort of going away because privacy from Apple and Google was being sort of slowly clamped down. But what was coming in its place was the retailer's first party data. And so that data that they had to, understand sort of the transactions from a brand level, from a category level, that was very much an in-store point of sale, very old school, like IBM, AS400 style data infrastructure. We needed to figure out ways to modernize that and connect it to a data spine so that could eventually get connected to, offsite media. So mobile apps, websites, things like that. And I think where that sort of got a little bit stuck over the last couple of years is that worked really, really well, but it was called like mid to low funnel, very sort of conversion focused. And now retail media is sort of turning into all media. And there's this sort of growing pain in terms of understanding how can it be full funnel? They want to use CTV, they want to use other channels in store, they want to have media, and they want it to be addressable. But you're sort of running up against the challenges of, well, if it's going to be really addressable and measurable, it's not going to get you the reach you want, things like that. So that's sort of where we are today.
I love it. That's super cool. So let's dive in. Something that you said that was really fascinating to me that I think every marketer is trying to figure out, and I'd love to kind of get your opinion here, the first party data and the privacy of things. That is something that everyone is trying to figure out. Now, we had the cookies are going away and then they're back, maybe kind of a situation. How in retail and media have you really figured that out? How have you really prioritized first party data? How has that made an impact? How has the strategy shifted? What does that look like in that space? What have you learned and what are you kind of doing in that area?
Well, I think data signals have become really, really important. And I think that initially cookies were used because it was just sort of, hey, we said we knew who you were. We didn't really know who you were. And we didn't know to a certain degree. Like we just sort of knew that some device was connecting. When you get to the retailer's first party data, they have real transaction history of like a whole basket. So they can really say, not only do we know who you are because it was a loyalty program like coupons.com, the reason for, why that all came out was, it's not just your cookie. It's literally your name, your address, your phone number, your email. It's all that sort of what they would call, non probabilistic or deterministic data. And so that type of data is far more valuable. And so, and who's allowed to have that? It's a company that engages in commerce, because without commerce, if it's just a publisher, there's not enough incentive on the user. There's not enough of a value exchange to give up that data. And the retailers obviously are in a position to hope to get you back. And so the idea is that there's an incentive alignment there with the retailers. But, generally it's just sort of they lucked out, really sort of watching what Amazon was doing and have started to sort of go in that same direction. And first party data is sort of the signal that trumps all the other signals that are out there. I think now with the business that I'm in, after being at Quotient, started Nextopedia, and that's a consultancy to help retailers and publishers who have marketplaces, give them an ability to take a hold of the data that they do have, and figure out ways to use it in a world where now the secret is out. Everybody has the playbook when it comes to using your first party data. How do you do that in an effective way? How do you drive conversions? How do you manage those relationships with the brands? Back to my sort of history as somebody on the trade marketing side, that's really where, that fight still goes on. It's how much is the brand going to spend with the retailer or the publisher? And that's really the name of the game.
I love it. So you talked about connecting data to the higher funnel. I think one of the difficulties everyone has is we collect first party data now, and it's really difficult to put that data in places to make it effective and actually do something with it. What do you recommend there? How do you connect it to the other parts of the funnel?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that when people, especially like analysts, when they look at, they're like, oh, first party data is really big, CTV is really big, and they're like, let's put them together. Two big numbers make better, sort of like performance or whatever. And if you really have to look at it, and this is sort of why I said that data is really important as signals. And the question is, what fidelity of signal do you need to do what you want to do? And when you're looking for reach, you can't have the highest fidelity of signal because, just by definition, if you have the highest fidelity of signal, it's somebody who's already bought your product. So if you're ever going to get any new customers, you have to broaden that out a little bit. And so I think the challenge that we're up to now is we've got to really look at the data sources that are available to us and say, it's not just first party or nothing. It's first party is really good for converting people, maybe expanding somebody's basket or, what they would call buy rate for somebody who's already buying stuff. But then you got to get to people who aren't buying stuff. And, like I think that one of the best fallacies is, if Kroger says that you're not a pet food buyer, It may be because you only buy that in online with Amazon, and in store they don't have that data. So it's not only that first party data is potentially limiting to a specific store's knowledge, but it's also just for any brand, they need to grow their consumer base, and they have to sort of look at, do I need to use syndicated data? Do I need to use data that potentially pairs with my data in such a way where I can unlock insights based on what I know about the customer as the brand? So things like that.
I love that. Excuse me. So if anyone's looking at opportunities to collect additional data and merge that data, what are some good places to start? To me, it sounds fairly intimidating to say, okay, well, where do I go? What do I do? As someone who's been in marketing long enough, I get email after email after email of, would you like to buy this list? Would you like this or that?
Yeah.
What are some reputable sources where you feel like you can actually trust the data?
Well, what you're hearing is basically people trying to get you to buy third-party data. And that's sort of, the reason why I've had, the sort of career path that I've been on is that is sort of going away. That's the reason why Oracle, sort of got rid of their advertising business. It's because third-party data just doesn't have the value unless you use clean rooms or other technology where you can merge data in privacy safe ways, in ways where you can't reverse engineer it, so the parties that you're collaborating with can't take the data and use it without you. So those are the types of things. Complicated and expensive, but it's becoming de rigueur, and it'll eventually, the cost will come down.
I love it. So one thing that I think of every time I think of data and first party data, third party data, anything of that nature, is really tracking the effectiveness and really measurement. How do we know what's working? How do we improve our strategy? How do we alter, test, do things like that? What are some recommendations on that front? How do we do better at measurement and actual testing to, create a better experience for our buyers and potential buyers?
So I think what's funny is, to some extent, we're doing a great job of testing with the tools that we have, or the standards and measurement approaches that we have. I think Joe Marchese is really good at saying things like, we've created attribution machines, or, taking credit machines, and we're not very good at actually persuading people anymore. Everybody's taking credit for everything. I think the challenge on the measurement side is two things. One, it's to some extent, when we create a standard, it gets gamed. And so, viewability is not enough. None of these things are enough. And I've learned actually that, markets are adversarial, and you need a little bit of opacity to make sure that the standards and the practices that people use are set up in such a way where the two sides aren't sort of gaming it in ways that create, an example would be, like in the retail media space, we had a really hard time selling anything but mobile inventory. It was all mobile because it was the cheapest and had the best click-through rate. TV has terrible click-through rates because that's just not what you do with it. Digital at home is tough to measure. So until you have some standards that level the playing field and say, hey, you know what? There's not enough attention given on a mobile ad, whereas on TV, the attention's really high. If you can figure out how to balance something like that, then you can start to understand that, maybe I do need to pay higher CPMs for certain media. But until that happens, the measurement isn't really what's broken. It's what you're measuring.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, something I've seen, I'm curious if this happens in retail media. This has happened in B2B a lot. The channels where they have the easiest attribution, and I love your definition of attribution, taking credit, those channels get the biggest investments because people feel like, okay, it's a sure bet. And that's the paid media channels, things like Google ads and social advertising, things like that. Where the brand really has a hard time is creating content and doing things where it's, hey, this is awareness, this is top of funnel. We're going to have almost no way of measuring the success of this content. We just know that our industry is going to see it.
Yep.
Do you run into the same things, and how do you kind of operate on those channels?
Yeah, I think retail media does best when it's just sort of capitalizing on that top of mind awareness that you already have. But if you're going to try to create new markets or new attention for your product, you do need to spend over and above your current customers. And so, it's really as simple as that. it's just very hard for marketers to want to do it because it's, it seems risky, but it's also the risk of doing nothing, or the risk of just sort of, hanging back and only talking to the people, preaching to the choir. Eventually, you will decline if that's all you do.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Tom, these episodes go by so quick. I love the conversation. I think it's really fascinating. Everyone's struggling to figure out attribution and reporting and first-party versus third-party data. I think this helps people kind of understand how to look at it from a new lens. So thank you so much for your insights. If anyone wants to reach out, connect with you online, how and where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me, Tom Lemongello, on LinkedIn. I'm also, I'm a podcaster myself, the Middlemen Podcast. If you look for that on LinkedIn, you'll find us as well. And again, I work for Nextopedia. So yeah, LinkedIn is pretty much my jam these days. It's kind of the easy button.
I love it. And for anyone listening, we will link to everything in the show notes so you can find Tom nice and quick. Again, Tom, thank you so much for the insights today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a fun one. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.